We'll get started. My name is Jamal Binding. I'm the chairman of the board of Movement Omaha for Race Equity, which is a group that deals with anti-racism and race issues in Omaha. And today we have a special guest with us, and we're going to talk more about this topic because I think it's a very timely topic, but also very informative for us to be able to talk this. Transgender is an emerging topic in Nebraska, and particularly in the legislative session, last session, even today, they're talking about those issues. We've heard a great deal about race and the number of African Americans who have murdered because of their sexual identities in our society. However, it is not discussed in many circles because of the stigma and the lack of education on this topic. There are specific movements in various states to make bathroom multi-sex. In other circles, transgenders individuals are deciding to play sports in multiple communities, and it's become an issue in many of these communities. Nevertheless, it becomes similar in terms of some of the racial issues that have happened, the challenges we've seen, such as discrimination that African Americans experience in the United States. However, the pushback is sexual orientation is merely an individual issue, some would say, and should not be elevated to group or racial status as in our country. From a white perspective, we will explore the local issues surrounding the medical community and what parents and advocates are dealing with in Nebraska. And we invited Suzanne Dau, who I've known for a number of years, and she's appeared on our show previously to talk about other topics related to race and so on, and related to our mission. Susan has appeared on many programs. She discussed these issues, and we've also know about her work with the community, with youth in sports, and particularly at different schools and so on. She's actually engaged with the LGBTQ plus community. And sometimes, as we've talked about, it's painful to see the level of racism practiced in sexual orientation groups against African Americans. We invited Suzanne to respond to a series of questions about an article also that appeared by a person named Mr. Rufo, who wrote a piece called Inside the Transgender Empire. It was in September 2023. Fascinating article. And basically it's from a publication called Imprimis. And again, this organization is obviously a very certified racist conservative organization, but they raised a number of polemics or ideas that I thought we should discuss today. There are many issues we want to talk about in this issue because too often our community does not get the opportunity to do this in safe circles. There are other sexual identities beyond straight, gay, bisexual, pansexual, and so on, but we're going to focus a little bit today on transgender and race for this program. We do plan to invite an African-American transgender advocate in a future program, and we will hopefully bring more information to you. But first, I want to start off, Suzanne, share a little bit more about yourself with the viewing audience, please.
Hi, so as Ajamal said, my name is Suzanne. I have been involved with the LGBTQ community for personal reasons for about 13 years. I have been involved with a nonprofit here in town that does a support group in multiple roles, most recently serving as their president for a few years. As Ajamal said, I have been involved with particularly the OPS school district, in other forms, not necessarily just the LGBTQ. I do have multiple students in the OPS school system. By day, I am an IT director, and I have probably over about the last 8 to 10 years done several talks here in Omaha, several online talks with organizations and companies who are looking for ways to either be more inclusive with their employees or ways to train their employees about topics of LGBTQ, including my own company of about 3,000 plus employees. Have done worldwide training with some of our employees as well.
So in Nebraska, this is important issue that has been discussed in the unicameral, particularly more so last session. And according to Mr. Rufo, who says transgender is using this concept or using the classroom to propagate this activism and this health profession and so on. And basically says it's about the mutilation of children under the euphemism of gender affirming care. How do you respond to such a loaded statement, or how does one respond to that kind of a statement, looking at what he wrote in an article?
In short, it's inaccurate. I, again, have been involved with this community from not only support, but from medically for many years, and have never known a doctor to perform any type of surgeries or mutilation on any child. I am aware of gender affirming care. There are medicines on the market today that have been widely available for decades outside of the US that are referred to as gender blockers, are puberty blockers, and they are used sometimes in medical necessity, and sometimes they are used for a child who feels they are transgender. It is no permanent. It is a blocker that basically suspends puberty temporarily, allowing the child to get to adulthood before they can make any kind of permanent decisions about their body.
Now, let me backtrack. We didn't talk about this earlier, but what is a transgender person for someone who don't know? And are there racial transgender people who are African Americans that you've met in the community? And then the other loaded question somewhat is, what's non-binary and are in this proton movement? So there's a number of questions I'll throw out at you there, but tell me what transgender means and so on.
Transgender is an individual who may not feel that they belong in the body that they were born with. Society has put on us these strict guidelines of what male and female are. And so transgender is somebody who may be born with male body parts or female body parts, but inside of themselves, they do not feel that what society has deemed as male or female. I will note gender identity is much different than sexual orientation. So a person can be born with male body parts and transition to female and still be gay. So as a female may still love a woman, or they may be a transgender male to female and be straight and love a man. Wow. So they are two separate categories.
Have you met any transgender in Omaha, African Americans?
Many.
Okay. And then the other question that I asked you is, what's this non-binary and this pronoun movement? Again, the article, he raises those issues. Give me a little bit of substance or light on those.
Non-binary basically means a person that does not particularly feel that they themselves fit into what society is deemed as male or female. Okay. So they may feel both sometimes. They may feel male more at certain times, and they may feel female more at certain times. The pronoun movement, I'll just be blunt, Ajmal, because I can. I believe that the pronoun movement is a sign of people becoming educated. Again, I think society has had these definitions of what male and female are, and we have often labeled them based on physical appearance. So if a person has a beard, it is assumed they are a man. If a person has breasts, it is assumed that they are a woman. And so those of us who identify as how we look, we oftentimes include our pronouns to be supportive of those people who may not always get to look like the gender that they feel. And so I do believe it's a momentum of support that many people show for others.
You know, it comes to mind, I remember when I was a graduate student in UNO, and I think it might have been working at one point, there was a professor there, Dr. Bacon, if I remember right, who was transgender. And I know the UNO community support him. And also from reading the information on the website, he was the head of the faculty senate for 3 times. So again, very much well respected and liked there. Do universities, national universities, local, offer safe spaces or courses in terms for queer theory, transgender studies, again, so on here, and particularly here in Omaha? What's your experience with that?
So I don't necessarily know the curriculum at the Nebraska universities. I do know there are many universities across the country that offer orientation or gender identity classes or curriculum. I know most colleges and universities now do provide safe places and safe spots on campus. I have a son that we have toured many colleges, and it's one of the things, even though he's not part of the community, it's one of the things that we look for when we go to these universities, because it's a sign of inclusion and a sign that they are a little more progressive. But I can tell you that the universities, especially the universities that have been offering this curriculum for some time, I think more universities are probably coming on now, but it is because of those universities offering that curriculum that studies have actually been done. And we are now starting to see the statistics of how high the suicide attempt rate is with transgender individuals, particularly the violence percentages against African American transgender individuals. So, whether the curriculum is controversial or not, it is allowed for studies for us to learn much more about these communities.
Hmm. So Suzanne, and I was watching the reaction of Senator McKinney and Wayne last year when they had the debate and so on. They implied the debate last year of transgender hijacked the session in terms of many of the bills that they wanted to pass, particularly those they were supporting dealing with the African American community. As a white woman, what suggestions would you have to bridge that political, social, or racial divide since racism exists within that community? Because there is a division, it's obvious.
There is. I'll start by saying I agree 100% that the session was hijacked last year. Um, I will go on to say that I would personally support it being hijacked again if the healthcare and the rights of individuals were being targeted to that extent. I don't think it would matter to me if it were bills that were against a specific race, but if it was a bill that said you are not allowed to use a bathroom or you are not allowed to receive the health care that your doctor feels you should receive, I would hope that the same people who supported the hijacking last year would be there
Mm,
again. That's the loaded question, and that's where for me personally, it would be the same. But I do understand that for some people, it's easier to get behind and support LGBTQ issues and maybe not want to stand up and support racial because they don't see it or they don't want to see it as much.
mhm,
Um, one of my probably I don't want to say a regret, but one of the things that I have struggled with is the nonprofit that I was involved with. When I came into position with them, I had declared that I wanted to turn the organization into a more inclusive organization, and I wanted to include the North Omaha community because I believe there's an LGBT community there that needs to be served.
mhm,
Um, and although I put forth efforts, um, I was not necessarily fully supported, and I can say that I did not accomplish what I had hoped to accomplish. Um, for multiple reasons, but I do acknowledge um, the divide, I guess I'd say.
mhm. It's interesting you said that because I mean, here I am been in the city all of my life, and I can say I only know maybe 3 or 4 folks who I would say who are African Americans or transgender, but I've never had a conversation. So it's interesting because I know at one point was at a First United Methodist Church we wanted to have a conversation that I was going to host, and somebody in the community said I would come and protest and hijack and do everything I can for you not to have it. And I'm saying, who are you to tell me what we can and cannot talk about in this day and age? But I do know that it's a volatile issue, and I think we need to spend more time on it as to deal with some of those divisions and so on. One point I was going to come up, and I goes to follow back to that. When Senator Chambers deals with a situation, we call it filibuster. Last year they used the word hijack, so it's kind of ironic that Ernie will turn a bill inside out and stop the whole session. That's when we have term limits now for him. But he, on the principle of it, he will go to the mat. And so when other folks start to do it, it becomes almost comical how we use the word hijack. But I picked that up from the media and so on. So I said I want to throw that out at you because Ernie is the master of controlling that whole place. And they fear him when he walks down the hall because, as he said, it's his show. But let me switch up a little bit. In some circles, many find it controversial or cutting edge because of polemic focus on political transformation. Some are saying this whole movement is about politics. Okay. How does one's sexual oppression, how does one's sexual orientation become oppressive in a sense in terms of this homosexual thing? Because some people are saying we're oppressed people and so on and so on. But explain that to me, especially if I come from a naivety and say, I've done nothing wrong to you as an individual. Explain that a little bit.
Well, I think again, we have to be careful that sexual orientation is different than gender identity. Um, but I also think um, heterosexual order is what we're led to believe, right? Men
Right.
are tough, women are meek and mild, men have beards, women do not. And when people don't fall into those categories, we don't know what to do. And so Native Americans have acknowledged five multiple genders for thousands of years. But for some reason, we, and I don't want to say as Americans, because I believe, I know it goes up across our borders, in the last 50 to 100 years have decided we get to decide that there's only two genders. So I often think about, not often, but I have thought about, when we look back and we think about how African Americans were treated, during the slave days, let alone, through all the way up until, well, even today, but even during the civil rights movement, um, you can't help but think, if they were treated that badly, what was how much worse was it if they were gay,
Hmm.
right? I mean,
Interesting.
it couldn't have been a good mark on their side, right? Like it
A double whammy, as we would say, triple jeopardy, and so on and so on. No, I understand that. I hear you. I hear you. There's a discussion by the current governor. I kind of laugh because I find it almost comical, absurd, and just stupid, and just, I don't know how to describe it, but he wants to define male and female. I'm like, are you serious? I mean, all the issues in government that we should be addressing, who
that's the
who
one we want to go
decide?
after.
Yeah, and so my question, most of us know the distinction in a sense, but why doesn't Nebraska government involve in this situation? I mean, will we start to define Uncle Toms and other individuals who work for state government? I'm saying that facetiously, but why is the government involved in that? As Ernie said, why is the government involved in your crowd or something, whatever? Talk to me more about that. What made
I
him do that?
I
I
think
don't
we
know.
I think we fear what we don't know, right? And if we don't educate ourselves, um, then we often lash out. I mean, you and I've talked many times about, when you get comfortable, that's a problem, right? We need to stay uncomfortable in our lives. Um, I do find it almost comical though, and I when people have challenged me, I will often say, well, what is male and female to you, right? I mean, and because most of the time it comes back to physical appearance. When I was a kid, I climbed trees, I played football, I did all of the things that labeled me as a tomboy.
Hmm.
That was what you were called. You were a tomboy. And if you were a boy who maybe liked to play with dolls, or you liked to dress up, you were a sissy. Because society has told us that is, it's not okay. Um, well, I think for tomboys it was probably okay. I think girls were more easily allowed to be more masculine, but for boys it was a much harder shift.
Wow.
But yeah, so I find it comical. What is boy? What is girl? Like I see. I mean, I identify as a woman and as a female, and there are things about me that you find very female. But you don't see me in fancy dresses. You don't see me in a lot of pink. Like, does that mean I'm just part female?
I find it strange the governor of all people, he's got enough on his hand doing with that nitrate or the pig form and so on to, weigh in on that one. And it's going to be interesting how he resolve that. He's going to get an attorney general's opinion. And does that now become the official Nebraska definition like they do in Texas or Florida? I mean, what are we doing here? It's kind of crazy. Um,
I agree.
I'm going to switch up something a little bit more serious here, and it's all serious, but this hit me a little bit harder. I think I want to talk. Transgender surgeries are individuals' decisions and should be decided between the patient and the medical community. However, one of my colleagues, and I call him out, Andrew Sullivan, because he's an editorial writer, he said children are too young to make such decisions, and we should only allow public policy adults to make consent choices and not their parents. How do you respond to that?
I don't, in all of my years of being involved with this, I do not know of one child who has ever undergone any type of surgery. And I do not know of any doctor, or have ever heard of a doctor who performed surgeries on minors. It's ludicrous. It doesn't happen. For a child to even receive blockers to pause puberty. So not permanent, it's a pause. When they stop the blockers, puberty comes on headstrong. Even to receive those blockers, a child has to receive counseling. They have to have a psychologist sign off. They have to have medical doctors sign off. I mean, the parents actually have very little. The parents have to agree to it, obviously, but
Mhm.
it is a psychological decision. And for the most part, what ended up being passed last year in the legislation was not, was not what advocates wanted, but in the end, it's still allowed. It is still allowing some children to get the care they need, but it is enforcing those rules that have already been in place. Like I said, I mean, I don't know of a doctor, and I have worked with Methodist, I have worked with Children's, I have worked with One World, I have worked with UNMC. I do not know of one doctor who has ever performed anything without proper medical research, without psychological, and certainly never a surgery, ever, ever, ever.
Wow.
And I don't even know if a doctor could legally do a surgery or like that. I would think, as an oath of a doctor, it would preclude them from being able to do that.
And you never know that, listen to the media and some of the people who
Mhm.
are pontificating out here and fat mouthing, as we say.
For many years, people still today, many people are born with both physical parts, right? They're born with the physical body of a male and a female.
Hmm.
And for generations, um, doctors would say, well, to the parents, well, what did you want, a boy or a girl? And then as an infant, they would, make that decision for the child. And then those people grow up and realize, well, my body looks male, but I don't feel male,
Hmm.
because parents had been allowed to make those decisions for the babies being born. I don't think that practice happens anymore, even at an infant level, because we now have enough research to know that's not how it works. Appendages aren't what make us male and female.
Hmm. I was sharing with my colleague this issue of race in our conversation, bit, and she suggested she would find someone, who's good in talking about from an African American perspective. But the question I want to ask you specifically: there are African Americans who feel the transgender movement hijacked the anti-racism or race equity agenda by lumping us all together, and that sexual orientation is different from 450 years of oppression, enslavement, Jim Crow laws. Should we delink sexual proclivity away from racial advocacy? And proclivity is kind of a loaded word also, but if not, should we not be working as a coalition? Give me some of your ideas or feedback on that.
You know, I it is a big topic, and I definitely do not believe they are the same. That oppression is way different. When you are Black or when you are Latino, you can't hide it. I can see you. I can see you're Black, Ajmal, and you can see I'm white, right? You don't get to walk down the street and pretend you're not who you are. When you are gay, particularly, um, nobody has to know, right? I mean, we all know people who have lived long lives before they ever decided to come out, right?
Right.
Because well, for whatever reason. Transgender, it's a little more, I mean, it kind of depends on the person when they transition, right? But even transgender individuals oftentimes can hide that they are transgender. So I do think it's different. Um, on the flip side of that, when a person comes out as gay, typically, right, they come out to, close friends or family first, and that plays out negatively or positively, right?
Hmm.
But then they go on through their life, and you know what? They got to come out to their doctor, so they got to do it again. And then they may have to come out to their employer, and they got to do it again. And depending on how people have reacted when they came out, can certainly, right, it can be traumatic, and people have to relive that trauma every time they make the decision to tell somebody that I'm transgender or I'm gay.
Hmm.
But again, it's still their choice to tell that, right? And so race is just such a different model.
Hmm.
As I said earlier, though, I do strongly feel, when you talk about the double whammy effect, I think I think that's where there is a place for intersectionality. I wish dearly that the LGBTQ community would embrace racial issues more than they do. For years, this city would allow the Pride Parade and the Juneteenth Parade to happen on the same day. And when they did separate, when it did become two different days, I don't know how often it happened, but when it did become two different days, my personal opinion is you saw more Black organizations supporting the Pride events than you did the LGBT organizations supporting Juneteenth.
Wow, did not know that. Heard it here first, folks. I know we're going to open it up to the audience. I got a few, but I want to ask you one other last question, just a kind of a wild card question, kind of. In terms of your work and who you are and what you've been doing for many years and so on, is the movement growing? That's one. And then number two, how are we in Nebraska? How do we rank? In other words, I don't know if we're good, bad, or different, high on the, as they say, on this whole agenda or not. Are we too conservative? What? But where are we at? Give me a little bit more of the climate of our state, because I don't know it in this area.
Well, as somebody immersed in it, we're horrible.
Nebraska's horrible.
But when you look around to Texas and Oklahoma and some of the southern states and other states, right? Yeah, we're about the same.
Wait,
but it is
Nebraska, those clouds. Oh, sorry, that slipped. I got to be a little bit more conservative. Okay.
It is tough when you're part of a population that a good portion, if not the majority of the state, is trying to tell you you are wrong, you don't belong, and the way that God or whoever you believe in made you is wrong. It's a problem, and because those problems stem into not, I mean, for these individuals to not find adequate medical care. When they do find adequate medical care, it's so expensive. I mean, I can tell you the medicine that these kiddos search out to pause their, just to give them a few years until they're old enough to of majority age to really make decisions for themselves, is upwards of $30,000 a year.
What?
So if you're a family that doesn't have really killer insurance or a big bankroll, it is a challenge that well, I mean, that healthcare is a whole other topic, Ajamal, but it is.
Suzanne, we're going to open up, but I really appreciate you sharing this, because I know one of the challenges that we face is that we don't have conversations like this in the public square. And oftentimes people get rumors. And again, you look at the media and it can be somewhat slanted in this area, that area. And again, when you read some polemics or these arguments, people also have a hidden agenda of what they're going to run with. So it's very good to be able to have this conversation, particularly as you deal with the issue of race and someone like you've worked in the community on many different issues dealing with low-income families and children and youth and so on. So I really appreciate that. So at this point, we're about halfway there, and I wanted to throw it open to other folks who wanted to join and say comments or questions of Suzanne, or even those of you who may want to make comments. And for some of you, I see some old familiar faces here, friends and so on, but feel free to jump in. And I play the role of the host and the moderator, so I don't do a lot of talking now. Other feedback, other reactions. I cannot hear
I
you.
will open up.
Okay,
I don't have a
good.
problem in asking questions, but
Okay.
I have three actually. I've been taking notes. Susan, one is I would comment on that last part where you talked about the parade and Juneteenth. And that is one of the problems that many African Americans or Black and brown are not really supportive of, like the Pride or Transgender or those types of things, just because you don't seem to support us when we are in trying to make strides in just everyday living and jobs and so forth. So I think, that is a major problem. And until that's going to keep that divide. So I think that the transgender or LBG, whatever you want to call, that is something that they would be able to gain more support if they were able to switch that and be able to support racial issues. And then I want to get off
100%
so I
agree.
can get through, and then other people can ask. When you mentioned that there's African population or Black population of transgender here in Omaha, are they open about it? Or do many of those who are Black hold back until they are within a group among themselves who are like? And then my last question, this has bugged me for I don't know how long, and I've had some friends, and I even had a gentleman who worked for me. I find that to be called queer to me is a negative. It's like using the N word or different things like in the Jewish race, a kite. Why do people want to be called queer? So those are my three issues.
So the first one, well, first of all, Cheryl, I'll just say I'm a fan. I listened to your meeting with Ajamal, and very, very powerful. So
Well, thank you. Don't
thank
say
you.
it too much because Ajma's already got a big head, and this will just give him more. And I've been keeping up with him and telling him how high his program was rated, of how many views. So we don't want to say too much for him, but go ahead.
So on the first topic, I 100% agree. When I got involved with the nonprofit, like I said, it was one of my things. Is I said, well, what can we do to go into that community? Because I do believe there's a community to serve there, and if our work is going to be in West Omaha, it's just like any racial work when you have
Mm-hmm.
churches who want to do race work, but they want to sit out at 156th and 178th, right? Um, it's the same way. And at that time, I reached out to some individuals. I even met with Metro. I met with Planned Parenthood to see what could we do to set up support in that part of town. And I gave up, and that was the wrong thing for me to do. But I continued to kind of meet a little bit of resistance,
Mm-hmm.
and it was tough, like I said. And so then going into your next point, most of the Black trans people that I know or have met have been because they did make it to out west and they did attend support meetings, right? And typically when people come to the meetings, they're coming because they're not supported in their community, right? Whether that's home or friend or work or but I do think there are more and more. I mean, there's a good number of, I'll say queer because I don't always know how they identify, Black people who are becoming advocates during Pride, right? And there's a couple that have been even on almost a national level. But I do think the harm rate of Black trans people is just it's higher than with white people.
Mm.
And so I do think they have to live, not have to, but they live in the
Secret.
closet to be safe. When I try to attend Transgender Remembrance Day ceremonies every year, and I sit and I sob because the pictures that come across the screen are almost always people of different colors, right? It's horrendous. Um, the topic of queer, yeah, I don't get it. But I'm a 52-year-old white woman who grew up thinking that was a bad word.
Yeah.
But it's a young term. I mean, it's the young kids who are using it.
And they don't feel offended. I guess
No,
I don't
not at
understand.
all.
That's what I have tried to understand. And I was telling the one I just can't let that come out of my mouth because I feel like I'm offending that
Mhm.
person. But they say, no, 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 Miss Lindsay, I'm like, okay, it might be okay with you, but it ain't okay with me. So I was just
Well,
wondering, how did that
I'm
become
just
so
going to
acceptable?
interject a comment there too, because I've worked with a lot of kids over my life as a school
Mhm.
administrator. Um, but I think that kids use that term because they don't feel like they fit in any of the other categories that are more defined. And so that's one that's safe for them. And they're okay. They know they're different. They're okay with that. They see queer as being different and not anything worse than that. And so I do think that's a totally generational thing. And I don't use the word queer very often either, because I'm older than probably everybody on this call.
Except for
But
Ajmal, but
oh, I'm older than Ajamal. Had that discussion in the past, haven't we, Ajamal?
Wait, I'm not confessing on TV or anywhere.
well, thank you for that, because you know what, I never looked at it that way. Not that I'm
Mhm.
going to probably change and call them
Right.
that, but I now, it makes sense to say, to feel okay with that, so that if the kids or other peers around them would call them queer, they don't look at it in that same light. So you've made a kind of understanding
Many of,
now that
yeah,
that could
so
be
many of those
acceptable to them.
kids don't know who they are yet.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's a safe place to land for them. And their peers like it. So it's all about feeling safe.
Hmm.
And that's a term they're safe with. So we have to be okay with it, even if we never use it.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Well, and I understand that some of the African American community don't object to the N word being used amongst themselves. It's when white people use it that they take great offense.
Right.
Correct.
So there's a similarity in whatever is the context about how it's being used and who's using it that makes the difference.
Good point. Very good.
Language is powerful.
Very much so. Kind of always goes back to that old saying they would say, sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hear you. And I find that wrong, is because it's
Yeah.
the words that will hurt you, because
Mhm.
once a word is said, it can never be taken back out of your mind and memory. So I I I think that, like I said, that's understandable for them. But I would say too, I think the reason the N word is used more among each other is, and I don't find it acceptable. I don't take the word period,
Mhm.
but I think that we look at that definition of what the N word is.
Mhm.
As they would say, oh, them white folks, they think the N is so and so, but anybody, it's not race based definition. Anybody can be the N word. So
Mhm.
I think that's where, not that I find it acceptable to use, but I have a little bit more tolerance for those who do it. No, I take that back. I don't have any tolerance for anybody who uses it, period. Even though, and I've had them say, well, when I say it, it's not meaning that, it means, and I'm like, no, I
Yeah.
don't buy it, but it's good. Thank you.
Yep.
Other feedback, other reactions. Does someone else want to share some comments, observations, any questions of Suzanne?
Well, one comment I would make, I kept thinking about the place of religion in this whole transgender issue, because our more fundamental religions, you might call them conservative, but fundamental, I think, is a better word, are all objecting to transgender issues. And they have objected to many gay issues. They certainly don't support uh, gay marriage, even though it's become legal in this country, as well as many, many others. But I think that I know, and I don't know, I don't have any accurate information, but I know a lot of the African American community are affiliated with the Baptist organization. And that's one of those, like the Catholics, that also affects all of us, do not accept marriage other than between a man and a woman. And so any of those gender groups in between or all around are considered, with some people even use the word abomination. That's in some of the national and international language of the Methodist Church, that we're fighting hard to be against it. It doesn't mean every congregation of any of these groups feels that way, but many do. And I
Mhm.
do think that helps support our political people. And when our politicians are looking for support to keep elected, they look at their whatever political affiliations they are, and they look at churches and what they're being taught by the religious community. And so I think that's an important part of this conversation as well.
Mhm.
I can tell you the overwhelming majority of people who come to support meetings because they need support, it is either because their church has shunned them directly, or it is because their families have shunned them because of religious beliefs.
Hmm.
Parents who shun their children because of being gay or transgender almost always tracks back to some church growing up religious that tells them it's wrong.
Wow.
So it is horrifically sad. And Carol's right. There are congregations, even amongst the denominations, that are not welcoming and such. But yeah, religion is that's a whole other session, Najamal.
Well, I think people use religion for everything that they don't want or
Yeah,
like. So
exactly.
it can be anything. It doesn't make any difference anymore. But I will say there's very few people, and some of them don't realize it, but there's very few people who do not have an LGBT person within their
life.
family.
Mhm.
It may be because that person hasn't come out, but they're there.
Agreed.
And I have met some people who I never would have even suspected, and until they felt very comfortable enough, they didn't come out in that manner. So,
Mhm.
but religion I have a problem with is it always gets me, whatever it is, whichever one it is, it's always talking about, well, God knows you, he made you, and everything good is made. So then how can you say that you're wrong because this person, you feel certain ways or something? So
Mhm.
When you have a child looking at your face at 3, 5 years old and saying God made a mistake, and your response is God doesn't make mistakes, but they feel the way they feel, yeah, it's turmoil.
As
You know,
someone who has
oh, go
been,
ahead.
I'm sorry, I apologize for interrupting. I find it interesting, and a couple of things. I want to go back to the Transgender Day of Remembrance because we hosted here at first, and I'm aware of the number of people who are so nervous to walk in this place because they're not sure that they're really welcome because of that very thing. The other thing I find fascinating is I think both sides in that religion conversation will call upon Psalm 139. I am wonderfully and fearfully made. And the people who see there's only two genders think that's God saying that's the only way. And the people who support the LGBTQ community go, oh, isn't this opens it up? And we are wonderfully and fearfully made, and it can't be bottled up into two neat little packages and everything is the same. So I just that that always amazes me when I get that verse thrown at me because I read it a completely different way.
Mhm.
Interpretation.
You-
It took me till I was probably 45 years old to start understanding that.
Language is powerful.
I was going to ask a question of the group in general, and I think some of you have met at First United Methodist Church. I throw that out shamelessly because there was a lot of activities we did together. About a week ago, I was at an event where Adam Fletcher Sass did something at the Lutheran Church in North Omaha, Mount Olive, and so on. And then we did something on the time for burning over at Augustino. And again, I'm not familiar with all the churches in the city and so on, but my question is, how open are other denominations and churches to having these conversations on race, sexual orientation, transgender, so on? Because I don't know that, but I only know the ones I've been invited to or been a part of. So is this something that happens in other denominations, or is it only certain groups? Because Suzanne, you just alluded to that the Catholic Church, and also we just heard about the Baptist Church, tend to be a little bit more provincial in these areas. But my question is, are there other churches doing stuff that we don't know about? Because again, the day we did the time for burning, there must have been at least 5 or 6 people from different churches talking about all the good stuff they do, and I've never heard of them and never heard of what they're doing. And so I'm always questioning so-called activists who are silent and hiding their Kindle on their bushel bag or whatever you want to call it. And then just so my question to y'all, are there other churches or religious faith group doing something in these kind of things that we're talking about here?
I think there are a lot of churches who are doing work in the LGBT community more and more. I don't want to say
In Omaha, Nebraska.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
there are definitely supportive church communities, Lutheran, Presbyterian, Methodist, right? There are churches that are supportive. But I will say, and this is not a shameless plug, I think First Church is one of very few churches that has been willing to tackle race and LGBT at the same time. I think a lot of the LGBTQ supportive churches are white, and we just know historically white people don't like to talk about race. So but they're, because of the whole everybody knows somebody who's gay, they'll talk about LGBTQ issues.
Wow. Other reactions?
I'm not saying there's not other churches that exist. I think Augustana is the perfect example. Pastor Jan is amazing and does amazing work down there. But I think those are harder to find, churches that are willing to tackle both topics.
I do know that there was at least 8 United Methodist churches that had their own group in the Pride Parade. And I know there were other denominations represented as well. There's some that don't represent themselves, like the Catholic Church, because their upper hierarchy is opposed to that. But that does not mean that individual congregations don't have a lot of supportive people involved with that. But their church wouldn't be allowed to actually, be part of a parade. There's like she said, Presbyterians. There's a whole group of Lutherans that I couldn't name them in Omaha, but there are quite a few. Episcopal churches, Unitarian churches.
Yeah, agreed. But it takes a special church to take on both topics, I think.
Yeah. And it's just been in the last couple of years that a lot of groups have added transgender. They started with just gay and lesbian and started working for those rights. And then gradually it became much more aware when parents were kicked out of schools because their child wanted to change their name and use a different bathroom. And then the public schools had to start dealing with that, and they did. I mean, every school experience, and I'm a former elementary school principal, every school experience wasn't positive, but it's more and more so. Wouldn't you agree, Suzanne, that schools are willing to accommodate these families?
My experience has been with OPS the most, and they have been on the right side of this from the beginning.
And Millard took a little longer, and that's where my history has been, but they came along too.
Yep.
And I was the very first administrator in the Millard Public Schools that came out publicly as lesbian. And that was after I had been there for 14 years. But I was pretty well accepted. I was very much accepted by my school, my staff, and the people in my community, not as much by some of the administrators at the central office, but they came around too and realized that it wasn't going to be a problem for them.
Jamal, when you and I spoke the other night, we were talking about Preston, and I think it's similar with the LGBTQ community. You get outside of Omaha, maybe outside of Lincoln, and things change quickly.
You mean if you're going to rural Nebraska, what you're saying?
I think schools in rural Nebraska are going to be way different than schools in Omaha.
Yeah.
Wow. Other feedback.
Both on race and LGBT issues.
Yep.
Oh.
I had a question, and one reason why I wanted to attend the meeting, I wanted to try to get some things, something cleared up of my understanding of, and the reason I'm saying this is I have a nephew and a cousin that's gay, and then I have a niece that says that has let us know that she's non-binary, and then I have another niece who's younger who says she's non-binary. And I happened to, when I went to school, I majored in psychology, and we took a class on human sexuality. And so I think I have a little bit background in it, and I've tried to help family members to understand. But then I'm like, okay, maybe I need to make sure I understand myself, because my understanding is that gender, like I remember when you used to fill out cards and things, it used to say your sex, and you said whether you were male or female. And then it started to change, and it said, what is your gender? And my understanding is that gender was supposed to be a social construct, kind of like race is, meaning that is what a society says or so forth. So like when I look at myself and some of my nieces that said that they were non-binary, I say, you know what? I think I might be non-binary too, in that I don't see myself as, my mother was always working. I like talking about politics. I wear hoodies. I think when the guest said she was a tomboy, I had a sister who was more of a tomboy, but I never really liked dolls or whatever. And I didn't. So I'm like, I never felt like, well, my best example I like to give is Thanksgiving, when the women were supposed to be in the kitchen and we were supposed to be talking about where we wanted to shop and all of that. I wanted to be with the men talking about sports and politics and different things. So I'm like, okay, maybe I don't fit so neatly into what society says. So what I would say, if somebody asked me, I would say, well, my gender is non-binary, my sex is female, and my sexual orientation is heterosexual. So I see those as three different things, and I don't know if I'm getting that confused, because I did a little research before the meeting. And I guess my question to the guest would be, what's the difference between transgender and transsexual? Because what I'm finding is a lot of people are confusing those things, because when you say your gender identity, you're non-binary, they're thinking that they're talking about they actually do want to change their sexual body parts, but that's not necessarily true. They're just saying that they're identifying, or they feel like they fit more into what society defines as male versus female. So I think there's a lot of confusion over what it means to be transgender, what that is actually means, and then like you were saying, what sexual orientation, what being gay means. So I guess my question is transgender something, and do I have the right idea of what transgender is that it's more about what your what your identity is, that you identify as being male or female, that social construct part of it?
I think it is, and I welcome any other comments from people who are listening here. But I think there are more and more transgender individuals who are not moving forward with surgeries, because we're learning, and they're learning that I can be born with the sex of a male, feel like a female, identify as a female gender, but not necessarily feel the need to go change my body and have surgery to become a female, but then there are others that do, like, they really believe, like, I am female and I need to bring this to full fruition. I think that's the struggle a lot of young kids feel, because there's so much pressure on us and pressure on them to know, well, are you a boy or a girl, right? Like, what are you? And they don't know. And these medicines that are out there are, like I said, allowing them to kind of take that pause and think about it and become adults. And some of them become adults and say, the way I've been feeling all my life is right, and I'm going to go and I'm going to have surgery, and then some of them are like, you know what? I'm comfortable feeling like a female, and I'm okay that I have male physical parts. Mm-hmm. I think that's part of the beauty of us continuing to evolve, right? I mean, I'll be honest, I still am evolving every day and learning, and I think we have to take the cue from the young generation, because they're teaching us. I mean, the fact that young kids are willing to come out and say they're non-binary, right?
We're down to about 4 minutes, but I want to throw another question out, going back to the education, and Carol, maybe you may fill in on this one too, Suzanne. You guys talked about pride and education, so on. How are our educational systems being? If you're a teacher, you work in counseling or whatever, do they actually teach this today? I have no clue, because I'm not invited into those buildings in different format, but is the education regime at UNO or Kearney or Lincoln, are they doing a decent job on helping people to deal with these issues? Because again, I assume you encounter in the classroom, and Carol, back when you were going through the teacher ed, I don't think we had that education back then, but
No,
are they doing it today?
we
I don't
didn't.
know that. Are they doing
You
anything?
know, I don't know what the universities are doing, but one of the things I wanted to comment on the last conversation we had, that sexuality, sexual orientation, gender identity, all of those are on a continuum. You know, just think about how sexual anybody is. It can be highly sexual or very non-sexual. In other words, you don't care about sex. And it could be anywhere in the middle, just like whether you identify as strongly male, strongly female, or somewhere in the middle, whether you feel that you're bisexual, only homosexual, only heterosexual, or anywhere in between. And that's what we've learned over the past 20 years of research into the GLBT issues, is that everything is on a continuum. None of it is, I'm going to use black and white. And you know, too, that there's a complete continuum along those lines, too, where black is black and black is brown and black is barely brown and on, etc. And there's just this continuum that most of the time, the people that are standing up and yelling and trying to pass laws are looking at black and white. They're not looking at a continuum.
When I used to do talks with companies and organizations, I don't do it anymore, but I used to have a little continuum chart, and I would pass it out and I'd have people fill it out. And it was different categories, different questions. You know, when it comes to your physical appearance, do you tend to dress more dresses and fluffy and ruffles, or do you tend to be more sweatpants and tennis shoes or hiking boots? You know, or how do you present? You know, do you have manicured hands and you know, you get pretty nails put on, or are you a naturalist? And as Carol said, sexuality, right? Or is sexual attractiveness a huge important? And we would have people plot. And the whole reason of the exercise was so that people could realize that even us, even those of us who identify as I'm a cisgender, straight, heterosexual woman, I don't fall down, you know, I don't fall down just the right side of female. I have a lot of left. I mean, Samana, you and I have talked about it. I have a lot of tendencies that are all over the continuum. So Carol hit it spot on. It's a continual, and I think, you know, it might change for some people as they age as well.
Well, I think that's especially true with our young people.
We got 2 minutes left. Any other questions? Any other comments? Carol, I interrupted you. Carol?
No, that was okay. I'm okay.
I was going to say, because you guys brought up something interesting, and since this is like transgender and racial, and we're kind of looking at those two things, because as I said, race is another thing that's considered to be like a social construct. And I would be interested in the other African-American people that are here. How would we feel about the idea of someone who said they don't identify with, I think there was in the news a little while ago where there was a white woman who was saying that she identified as being Black. And so she went and, you know, and people were like, well, you can't, you know, if you're white, you can't identify as being Black. So, but then also too, how would we as Black people who said, okay, some Black people know that they have been told, well, you act white or you're doing things that are considered to be white. And then there are some white people who they will say, well, you're hanging out with Black people, you're trying to be Black, you're identifying, and therefore they're identifying as Black. But then what if they went and tried to, because I know in the Black community, there would be a lot of criticism if they tried to physically change their skin color, or if they, because like with Michael Jackson, there was always comments about he's changing his nose, he's doing this, and he's trying to look white. Or then with Kim Kardashian, they were saying she's browning her skin and she's trying to look Black. So it seems to me that there's, again, this thing of whether you're psychologically identifying and saying, I identify with this. And then when you start saying physically, I'm going to change myself, and on that continuum, that seems to get a lot more criticism and a lot more pushback than if you just say, I identify that way and interests and that type of thing. So,
you know, we're down to our last seconds of the show. And I want to just say, you know, I really appreciate the participation, the engagement. Also, Suzanne obviously throwing some heavy light on this topic. And so hopefully we'll have a chance to revisit and hopefully get more people involved. But again, this is the kind of thing that we need more in this community. And I appreciate folks being able to engage tonight on this important topic that we need to do in Omaha and particularly in Nebraska. So on that note, as we say, may the force be with you. Baroko.